In the distant galaxy of Varnock, where stars gleamed like diamonds scattered across a velvet sky, an ancient species known as the Elders had long watched over the universe's evolving civilizations. The Elders were revered for their wisdom, their intelligence stretching across millennia, and their almost prophetic understanding of the cosmos. However, in their many years of observing, they had seen something that caused them grave concern, a species from a distant, lesser-known planet called Earth. The Elders knew that humanity, though young and seemingly unrefined, held within them a potential that could reshape the galaxy. Their warning was clear and unsettling. Beware the humans. They are unlike any species you have encountered before. Despite the gravity of this warning, the other galactic civilizations dismissed it. After all, the Elders had been right in the past, but their predictions about the dangers of various species were often seen as exaggerated. The galaxy had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall, and many thought that the humans, with their primitive technology and fractured societies, could never pose a significant threat. How dangerous can one species be, they wondered, ridiculing the Elders' words. The arrogance of the galaxy's ruling races led them to ignore the warning, focusing instead on their own agendas, expansion, trade, and the ever-growing quest for power. Yet there was one species that took the Elders seriously, the Crethians. A warlike and expansionist race, the Crethians had built an empire spanning many star systems. Their military strength was unmatched, and their leaders ruled with ruthless ambition. They heard the Elders' prophecy and saw it as a challenge, a way to test their own superiority. The Crethians believed that they could crush humanity before it even had a chance to grow. "They are nothing," they scoffed. "A primitive species, not even worthy of our attention." The Crethians, however, made a grave mistake. They underestimated humanity. They saw Earth's tech as outdated and their defenses as laughable. What they didn't understand was that humanity was not defined by its technology, but by something far more dangerous: their will to survive. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, humanity was not idle. They were learning, growing, and preparing for something bigger than themselves. Unknown to the rest of the galaxy, humans were quietly laying the foundation for their future, advancing in ways no one had noticed. Their technology, though still in its infancy compared to other races, was evolving faster than any civilization had anticipated. Humans had the unique ability to adapt quickly, solving problems with creativity and tenacity that no other species could match. While the galaxy's civilizations focused on other matters, distracted by their own ambitions, humanity was working in the shadows, learning the ways of the stars. They had already begun exploring the outer reaches of space, constructing colonies on distant planets and establishing trade routes between the stars. The Crethians, blinded by their arrogance, believed they had all the time in the world to deal with Earth. They never expected that the small, seemingly insignificant human race would ever challenge them. But as the months passed, a quiet storm was brewing. The humans, driven by their desire for survival, were honing their skills, developing new technologies, and forming alliances with other species. They understood that to survive in a galaxy full of powerful civilizations, they would need to do more than just defend. They would need to fight, adapt, and outsmart their enemies. The humans' greatest strength lay not in their weapons or ships, but in their ability to evolve in the face of adversity. And so, while the galaxy's great empires turned their attention elsewhere, the humans were preparing for something that would change everything. They were no longer the weak, insignificant species the galaxy had once believed them to be. The Elders' prophecy was not a warning about a distant threat. It was a glimpse into the future, one where humanity would rise to become the most formidable force in the galaxy. But it was too late for anyone to heed the warning now. As the HFY galaxy continued to ignore the signs, humanity was already quietly becoming a power that none could ignore. The stage was set. The future of the galaxy would be shaped by those who had underestimated the humans. And soon, the Crethians, and the rest of the galaxy would learn that humanity was not to be dismissed. The Elders had seen it, but now it was up to the rest of the universe to discover what humanity was truly capable of. Humanity's first steps into space were tentative at best, a mix of hope and uncertainty. They had only just begun to carve their place among the stars, with primitive space stations scattered across the galaxy, exploring distant planets and forging small outposts on barren worlds. The technology they had was decades behind the more advanced races, crude engines, fragile shields, and weapons that seemed laughable when compared to the mighty armadas of galactic powers like the Crethians. Yet, humanity had something that these other species lacked: resilience. It was in their blood, their history, and their way of life. They were a species that had fought to survive from the moment they first walked on two legs, and this same unyielding will to thrive would be their greatest strength in the cosmos. It didn't take long for humanity to make remarkable strides. They had a unique ability to adapt, learning from failure and turning it into something greater. In mere years, they developed new energy sources that were light years ahead of anything other races had achieved. Their artificial intelligence, once clumsy and unreliable, rapidly grew into a powerful force, one that could think and evolve with a speed that astounded even the galaxy's oldest civilizations. The humans were making progress at an exponential rate, driven by a thirst to understand the universe, to explore it, and above all, to survive in it. But it was their unity that set them apart. Unlike many of the galaxy's divided and fragmented empires, humanity had a sense of purpose and cooperation that allowed them to overcome their own weaknesses. The vast differences between the various human nations had been put aside for the greater good of the species. Governments, corporations, and civilians worked together as never before, pooling resources and sharing knowledge. This was not just the strength of their technology, it was the strength of their collective will. And so, when the Crethians, led by their insatiable desire for conquest, launched a brutal and unexpected attack on the human colonies, they were met with something entirely unforeseen. The Crethians had expected easy victories, just as they had won so many times before against weaker species. They imagined that humanity, in its infancy as a spacefaring species, would crumble under the weight of their assault. What they didn't understand was that the human spirit was not so easily broken. Rather than folding, humans did what they did best. They adapted. They didn't simply defend. They fought back with a ferocity and cunning that the Crethians had never seen before. The first few battles were small skirmishes, but the humans learned quickly. They used their intelligence, their ability to improvise, and their knack for turning weakness into strength. They struck at the Crethian supply lines, using guerrilla tactics and stealth to confuse and disorient their enemies. The Crethians, used to overwhelming their opponents with sheer force, found themselves unable to keep up with the humans' unpredictable strikes. As the human forces grew bolder, they launched an all-out counteroffensive, hitting Crethian command centers and weapon depots in ways the Crethians never thought possible. The humans fought not just to survive, but for the future they believed in, one where they could live free from the oppression of other species. The Crethians, who had once mocked humanity as a primitive species, were now on the defensive. Each battle seemed to reveal new tactics, new strategies that left them scrambling to respond. The humans' flexibility was their greatest weapon. Where one plan failed, another was quickly devised, and in the chaos of battle, they adapted faster than the Crethians could process. The tide began to turn, and the Crethians found themselves caught off guard by this unexpected, relentless force of nature. Meanwhile, the Elders, who had watched these events unfold from a distance, could not believe what they were witnessing. They had spent centuries warning the galaxy about the dangers of humanity, but now it was clear that their warnings had been dismissed too easily. They had underestimated humans, not only as a species, but as a force. Humanity was not a weak, young civilization waiting to be crushed. They were a dynamic, evolving power that would stop at nothing to carve their place in the galaxy. As the battle raged on, the galaxy's other races watched in stunned silence. The Crethians, once the unquestioned dominant force in the galaxy, were now finding their empire under siege by a race they had dismissed as unworthy. The humans, through their resilience, ingenuity, and unity, had become an unstoppable force. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would survive, it was a question of just how far their reach would go. The Elders, in their infinite wisdom, began to realize the true nature of their error. They had warned the galaxy of the danger humanity posed, but they had never understood the depth of the human spirit. What they had underestimated was not just human technology or strategy, it was humanity's ability to rise, no matter the odds. And now, they would see the full extent of that rise. The galaxy was changing, and the humans were at the heart of that change. The initial victories had given humanity hope, but the Crethians were far from defeated. With their pride wounded and their power challenged, they launched a full-scale invasion of Earth itself, bringing their massive war fleets into the heart of the solar system. The sight of their colossal ships blotting out the sun sent shockwaves of fear across the human colonies. Despite their previous success, humanity was now facing a threat unlike any before. The Crethians, sure of their overwhelming numbers and technological superiority, believed that this time they would crush the humans for good. But the humans had learned from their past mistakes. They had understood the value of alliances, something no one had anticipated. Despite their earlier isolation, humanity had quietly reached out to neighboring species, forming bonds and building relationships with races who shared their hopes of a free and independent galaxy. The humans, once considered an insignificant race, now found themselves supported by a coalition of like-minded species. The Crethians had underestimated humanity's ability to unite and form a collective force strong enough to stand against them. Together, these new allies bolstered the human forces, and though still outnumbered, humanity was no longer alone in their fight. The shift in balance was subtle at first. The human fleet, once a modest collection of ships, now stood as a force to be reckoned with. Their engineers, driven by the necessity of survival, had developed new weapons that caught the Crethians off guard. These weapons, based on principles the Crethians had never considered, shredded through their advanced shields and armor. But it wasn't just the weapons that surprised the Crethians. It was the humans' technological innovation. The humans had deployed a new weapon, an experimental AI-driven warship, designed not just for power, but for intelligence. This ship, nicknamed Sentinel, could predict the Crethians' movements with an accuracy that made it nearly impossible to defeat. The humans now had the edge in strategy, outsmarting their enemies at every turn, and the Crethians found themselves losing battles they once thought certain. However, what truly made humanity's forces deadly was something far more powerful than weapons or technology. It was their resolve. The Crethians, in their arrogance, had believed that humanity could be broken with a single strike. But when they unleashed their full force on Earth, causing widespread destruction, they didn't destroy humanity, they only made them stronger. The attack on Earth was brutal, tearing through cities, annihilating infrastructure, and leaving millions dead in its wake. But in the wake of that destruction, something incredible happened. The humans refused to surrender. Instead of crumbling, they rallied together with a speed and unity that no one could have predicted. Within hours of the attack, every available human, civilians, scientists, engineers, soldiers, came together to rebuild, adapt, and strike back. The scale of their recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Earth's people, who had once been divided by borders and political strife, now worked as one. The damaged cities were rebuilt with astonishing speed, and the human war effort gained momentum once again. The Crethians, who had expected the human population to panic and crumble under the pressure, were instead faced with a species that seemed to grow stronger with every loss. The more the Crethians pushed, the harder humanity fought back. The human response was not just tactical, it was a testament to their unbreakable will. Unlike the Crethians, whose strength was based on brute force, humanity's strength lay in their ability to adapt, to rise from the ashes, and to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. They had faced devastation, but instead of retreating, they stood taller, their resolve shining brighter. The Crethians, once so confident in their ability to crush this young species, now found themselves struggling to contain the human onslaught. In the midst of all this, the galaxy began to take notice. Species that had once viewed humanity with indifference were now watching closely. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had become a full-scale war, with humanity proving, time and again, that they would not be easily defeated. With every passing day, their strength grew, and their reputation spread. The Crethians, so used to conquering without challenge, were now facing the true power of humanity, not in their technology, but in their hearts, their minds, and their unwavering determination. As the battle raged on, the tide was slowly but surely turning. The Crethians, once so sure of their victory, now found themselves on the defensive, while humanity, a species they had underestimated from the very beginning, had become the greatest force in the galaxy. The war was far from over, but one thing was certain. Humanity had proven they would not just survive, they would win. And the Crethians had learned, too late, that the greatest mistake they had ever made was underestimating what humans were truly capable of. The war continued to drag on, both sides suffering terrible losses as the conflict stretched across star systems. The Crethians, once so sure of their dominance, began to feel the weight of their mistakes. They had underestimated humanity, but now they were seeing the full force of what had been unleashed. Yet, even though the battlefields were littered with wreckage and the death toll mounted on both sides, it became clear to anyone watching that humanity was slowly but steadily gaining ground. What set the humans apart, however, wasn't just their technological advancements or military strategy, it was their principles. In the depths of their struggle, when other civilizations might have crumbled or surrendered, humanity stood strong. They didn't fight for glory, for riches, or for conquest. They fought for something far more dangerous to the Crethians, their freedom. The human spirit, unyielding and resolute, was not swayed by fear or intimidation. Their fight was driven by the deep-seated belief that they had the right to exist, to shape their own destiny, and to choose their path without interference from any empire, no matter how powerful. This belief in freedom became their greatest weapon. The Crethians, accustomed to conquering species by sheer force and dominance, could not fathom a species willing to endure such hardships simply to protect their way of life. The humans' strategy was never just about direct confrontation. It was about chipping away at their enemies' morale, about showing the galaxy that humanity could endure anything and still rise stronger. While the Crethians relied on brute strength, the humans struck at their very foundation, by refusing to break, by showing their enemies that their resolve was unshakable. As the weeks turned into months and then into years, the Crethians began to realize they were losing. Their once invincible fleets were being broken apart, their planets and colonies falling one by one. But by the time they understood the true depth of their predicament, it was already too late. The humans' alliance with neighboring species had grown stronger. Their numbers swelled with those who had once watched from the sidelines. What started as a desperate war for survival had become a coordinated effort of liberation, one that was sweeping across the galaxy, changing the very landscape of power. The Crethian Empire, once the most fearsome force in the galaxy, was now crumbling. Their fleets, once the pride of their civilization, were shattered. their forces retreated from human territory, only to find that their retreat was met with even more resistance. The human spirit had proven to be more resilient than any weapon, and soon the Crethians were no longer fighting to conquer, they were fighting to survive. As the Crethians' empire fractured, the galaxy watched in awe. What had once seemed impossible was now unfolding before their eyes. The human alliance, led by their undying determination and belief in freedom, had turned the tide of the war. The battle-hardened forces of the Crethians were no match for the unity and resolve of humanity. One by one, the Crethians were forced to surrender territories, their once mighty empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. In the midst of the chaos, the elders, who had so confidently warned the galaxy of humanity's potential for destruction, were forced to watch the tide shift in a way they never imagined. They had seen it coming, but they had never fully understood the depth of humanity's resolve. They had warned that humans would rise, but they had never accounted for how the human spirit could unite entire worlds, how their belief in freedom could turn the galaxy against a once dominant power. The elders, despite their wisdom and foresight, had underestimated the power of a people who had been pushed to the edge. The Crethians, in their desperation, eventually had no choice but to open negotiations. They were forced into a peace treaty, a humiliating capitulation to the very species they had dismissed as weak and inconsequential. The treaty that had been forced upon them was one that left them with no options, and the humans, now recognized as a powerful force, took their place in the galaxy as the new power. In the end, it wasn't the advanced technology of the humans that had won them the war. It was their unbreakable will, their sense of unity, and their relentless pursuit of freedom. The galaxy, once dominated by the Crethians, was now a very different place. Humanity had risen, and they had not just survived. They had emerged victorious. The power had shifted, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Crethians had learned a harsh lesson. Never underestimate the strength of a species that fights not just for survival, but for the right to exist on their own terms. And, as the galaxy looked on in stunned silence, humanity's rise to power had only just begun. Years passed after the war, and the galaxy that had once been torn apart by conflict was now slowly rebuilding, forever changed by the events that had transpired. The human victory over the Crethians had not only altered the balance of power, but it had become a defining moment in the history of the cosmos. It was no longer just about military might. It was about the ideals that had driven humanity's success, unity, ingenuity, and an unyielding resolve to survive. The humans had faced their greatest challenge and emerged victorious, but it wasn't just the destruction of the Crethians that marked their triumph. It was the fact that they had shown the galaxy that even the most powerful civilizations could be challenged, and that through cooperation and determination, a species could achieve the impossible. The other civilizations, once doubtful of humanity's potential, now saw them in a new light. Where once there had been skepticism and mistrust, now there was respect. The humans had proven that they were not simply survivors. They were capable of standing toe-to-toe with the greatest forces in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through a combination of intellect, adaptability, and a will to live free. The lessons they had taught the galaxy were far-reaching, that power alone was not the key to dominance, and that true strength came from within, from the unity of a people who refused to be broken. In recognition of humanity's newfound place, in the galaxy, the elders, who had once warned the universe of the danger humanity posed, now found themselves standing in awe of what humanity had accomplished. The very species they had feared had reshaped the cosmic order in a way they never thought possible. Realizing that the galaxy could no longer be ruled by one dominant power, and that a new era of cooperation was necessary, the elders called for a summit, a gathering of all the galaxy's races, to come together and forge a new path forward. They had no choice but to acknowledge humanity's role in this new chapter, and to accept that the future of the galaxy was now in the hands of a species that had once been considered insignificant. As the humans arrived at the summit, they were met not with hostility or suspicion, but with a newfound respect. They were no longer outsiders, they had earned their place at the table. And in their eyes, it was clear that they did not come to dominate, but to collaborate. Humanity's representatives did not bring weapons or threats. Instead, they brought something far more valuable: ideas. The humans advocated for a future where all races could live and grow together, not in isolation or through endless conflict, but through collaboration. They spoke of resilience, of the power of community, and of the importance of mutual respect and understanding. Where once the galaxy had been divided by borders and empires, now there was the potential for something far greater: an interconnected cosmos built on shared knowledge and peace. The elders, though proud of their own wisdom, couldn't help but feel a sense of humility. They whispered to one another, not in anger or regret, but in quiet acknowledgement. We warned them, but we never truly understood the power of humanity. They had spent countless years advising the galaxy, seeing themselves as guardians of knowledge. But even they had underestimated the profound strength of a species driven by the will to survive and to make a better world. Humanity had not just survived the war, they had transformed it into an opportunity for change. And now, they were guiding the galaxy toward a future where survival wasn't just about fighting and conquering, but about building something better, for all. In the end, it was clear that humanity's legacy was not one of conquest. It was not one of empire or dominance. Instead, their legacy was one of creation, of shaping a new era of cooperation and mutual respect across the stars. The humans had shown the galaxy that it wasn't enough to simply survive. It was about thriving, about learning from past mistakes, and about forging new paths together. They had risen not as conquerors, but as architects of a future that was brighter for every species. As the summit concluded and the races of the galaxy made their agreements and commitments to peace, humanity stood as both a symbol and a catalyst for change. They had done the unthinkable, and now they were leading the way into an era where the power of unity, resilience, and understanding would define the future of the galaxy. And as the stars twinkled above, humanity knew that their true journey had only just begun, one where the promise of peace and cooperation would echo through the universe for generations to come.